As I'm sure all of you are aware by now, Pierpaolo Piccioli is taking over as creative director of Balenciaga shortly after a long-term successful tenure by Demna Gvasalia. This is a very full circle moment, as his first Instagram post in 2018 was a picture of Cristobal Balenciaga's famous 1967 wedding dress, which was actually seen in the Met Costume Institute exhibition, Heavenly Bodies, Fashion and the Catholic Imagination. But instead of just making this video like, oh, Pierpaolo's at Balenciaga, that's so cool, I thought it would actually be more interesting to really talk about some things that I'm looking forward to and some reasons why I think he could or could not work as the creative director of Balenciaga. First of all, it seems like Kering has a new hiring strategy where they only hire designers that they have experience working with. It seems that since their experience with Sabato, now they're only working with proven designers. Of course, we've seen the likes of Demna, who was moved from Balenciaga to Gucci after seeing insane amounts of success through Balenciaga. We have now also seen an appointment of Pierpaolo Piccioli, which, for those of you that don't know, in 2012, Valentino was acquired by Qatari investment fund Mayhoola for 700 million euros. In July 2023, Kering acquired a 30% stake in Valentino for 1.7 billion euros. This deal actually includes an option for Kering to acquire the rest of the brand by 2028. And so if you think about it, if they acquired 30% of the brand in 2023, that was still when Pierpaolo Piccioli was there. So they have definitely had some experience with him. They've probably seen a lot of the financials when he was there. They've seen what's selling, what isn't. And there's very clearly something that they've seen in him. And they must believe in him based on experience and data, which is why, of course, he was appointed. So I think that Kering now is going for very safe bets because they can't really afford to go for these new budding designers anymore. They need to go for proven designers, especially at the bigger brands, because so much is at stake right now with Kering. To read the official statement made by Kering, it says, Kering and Balenciaga are pleased to announce the appointment of Pierpaolo Piccioli as the new creative director of Balenciaga, effective July 10th, 2025. The first Balenciaga collection under Pierpaolo Piccioli's creative direction will be unveiled in October 2025. Now, it's really important to really know about Pierpaolo's background to know why it makes a lot of sense that he has been appointed at Balenciaga. Pierpaolo was at Valentino for 25 years, I know, an extremely long time, and he worked his way up. He started as an accessories designer with Maria Grazia Chiuri. They came up together in the brand and they eventually became co-creative directors. Eventually in 2016, Maria Grazia Chiuri became the artistic director of women's wear at Dior. So Pierpaolo Piccioli was left as the sole creative director, which is a role that he stayed in up until recently. If you think of what is it about Demna's Balenciaga that has garnered such a cult following and why does it sell so well, it's because Demna and his team at Balenciaga had an amazing way of making really desirable accessories and footwear especially. Everything down to the Trooper boots, the Tyrex, the Triple S. It's almost like everything they touch turns to gold. The accessories, even when they're stupidly ridiculous, they still garner a lot of attention, whether that's Balenciaga selling an IKEA bag or making a bag out of a leather shoebox. If I see Lay's bags one more time, or those incognito, Margiela-esque beanies on TikTok one more time, I will literally lose my mind. And Pierpaolo Piccioli himself knows a thing or two about creating extremely successful footwear and accessories. The Rockstud collection, if you remember, was a huge hit. The Valentino Rockstud shoes were actually first released in 2010, debuting on the runway via the Fall-Winter 2010 collection. The Rockstud collection was so successful, they started to create Rockstud accessories in all iterations. We saw sneakers, bags, belts, and many other things. However, I don't think Pierpaolo Piccioli has been able to garner that same mainstream buzz that he did from the Rockstud collection. And that is very difficult because at Balenciaga, Demna was very consistent. He was able to churn out hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. And that's why so much of it sold, right? And I think Pierpaolo will have a hard time, but I believe in him, creating products that are constantly desirable over and over and over and over again. I think that was Demna and his team's, big selling points, how consistent they could make, selling really, really big things and how consistently they would make new iterations of footwear and stuff like that that people actually loved and bought. Now, an opinion I've seen online, even though this story just broke, but I've seen quite a few opinions because I was scrolling through Instagram. A lot of people are saying that Pierpaolo joining Balenciaga means that Balenciaga wants to go in a completely different direction aesthetically. And I could not, agree less, could not disagree more, because I think people are selling Pierpaolo's work short. Pierpaolo has shown over the years that he has range. I've seen everything from Pierpaolo Piccioli. Yes, he's known for elaborate gowns and his amazing couture shows. However, I've seen him do streetwear designs. I've seen some collections that look more streetwear-esque. I've seen Pierpaolo collaborate with many different brands. He's collaborated with Moncler Genius making outerwear dresses, but also more simple jackets. So I've seen all different kinds of products from Pierpaolo. So this idea that Pierpaolo is going to go to Balenciaga and completely change it, and it's going to be, long line dresses, and it's going to look very conservative, which is more of an aesthetic that we associate with Pierpaolo when you compare it to Demna. I get where that comes from, but I think that Pierpaolo has shown enough range to show that he's not just going to do the same aesthetic at every brand he goes to. He's shown that he can do many different aesthetics. And I'm sure by now, Kering has learnt that doing a complete 180 in aesthetic does not work. We talk about this all the time when we talk about Alessandro Michele and Sabato De Sarno. I think if you build an audience that consistently buys a very specific thing or very specific aesthetic, and then you change creative directors and you do a complete 180 on aesthetic, and you expect all those customers that went for that initial thing before to stay and to build customers upon that so that you see, revenue growth, I think it's diabolical and almost silly to think that you can do that. It made sense when brands were smaller. It made sense in the early 2000s when these brands weren't making 11 billion euros in 1 year, right? If you're a company and you make 100 million, there are many different 100 million market segments, right? There are less market segments for 11 billion. So when you're working at 11 billion, there's a higher chance for you to lose money if you start doing anything different versus when these brands were just making a few 100 million or 90 million a year. It was very easy for them to change creative directors and have different aesthetics and for it to still work and it to not affect them financially because they're playing with smaller figures. So there's more room for error. There's less room for error when you're dealing with these massive figures, which is why Gucci has been struggling. So I don't think that they're going to go a complete 180. I think they've learned their lesson that at the point they are now financially, that just can't be the case. And the thing is, it's not like you can't change the aesthetic. It just needs to be a slow transition, which gives consumers enough time to acclimatize to the new aesthetic, to the new products, to the new branding. And that way you can bring them along. If it's too stark or too harsh, people don't understand it. People are like, oh, I used to like this when I used to buy it from this brand. Now I'm just going to find a different brand that does what I used to buy, right? You do not want that. And Pierpaolo himself seems to very clearly understand this because I'll read some of the quotes that he gave in his interview with Vogue about his appointment to Balenciaga, but it was along these sort of lines. So what he said is, "This is a new moment for fashion, and you can change the rules only from the inside. I think we can deliver a new image of fashion that is about assertiveness, humanity, and intelligence, which is not granted very often. Balenciaga already exists in a community. I want to embrace that community and the spirit of Balenciaga, to make my own chapter in the same story." And so that's a clear understanding that he's already telling you he's not just going to completely change the aesthetic. He feels like it already has an audience, already has its cult following, and he's already trying to see where he fits within all of that, right? To read another quote, he said, "I want to embrace the past because I feel that it's very important to have respect for what Nicolas Ghesquière and Demna did before me. The story of Balenciaga is a story of designers that I respect. This is more a passing of the torch rather than a game of chairs, and I feel very lucky to be a part of it." So it's very clear that even he understands that, you can't just completely change and reinvent the wheel because it just doesn't work in this luxury fashion climate. It really, really doesn't work. I also find it interesting that he mentioned Demna and Nicolas Ghesquière, but not Alexander Wang when he was mentioning, very recent previous creative directors. That was very interesting. And I'm very sure the people at Kering must have thought about this appointment for a really long time. Kering is in a very, very interesting position right now. Of course, the most important brand by a landslide is Gucci. Gucci makes practically all the money for Kering. And so that's why Demna has the most important job right now. But I also think that Pierpaolo Piccioli's job is super important. If Kering wants to not have the financial issues that they continue to have, they need to be less reliant on Gucci. When you look at their financial reports, there's a massive gap between Gucci and everything else, like Saint Laurent Paris and, of course, Bottega Veneta. And sometimes you don't even see Balenciaga on the report because it doesn't really make enough money to be shown, right? It's just in the other brands category. However, if they could balance their books, if Bottega Veneta could make more money, if Saint Laurent Paris could make more money, if Balenciaga could make up that deficit, then they would be less reliant on Gucci, and then bad performance from one specific brand would not completely tank their share prices. So I think if they are smart, if they're being smart, they have a long-term strategy on how exactly they're going to build Bottega Veneta, they're going to build Saint Laurent Paris, they're going to build Balenciaga to the same financial level as the likes of Gucci. I personally think Bottega Veneta and Balenciaga are really fast growing, and I think they have so much untapped potential when it comes to being in market segments that they don't really do well in. A good example is beauty. I know Kering launched Kering Beauty not too long ago, and they're clearly focusing, and they've said they're focusing on launching fragrances with Balenciaga, and they are planning on re-releasing some old Balenciaga fragrances. A lot of the partnerships with, Coty that Kering has had in the past haven't really been that lucrative for them, and that's why they didn't renew the contract. So now that they're focusing on Kering Beauty, there's so much untapped potential on how much money they can make via their fragrances, via their candles, via lipsticks and other things. And all these things haven't even really been properly launched yet, especially not with Balenciaga. With Bottega Veneta, they've already sort of launched their first release of fragrances. But Balenciaga, it's still cricket. And there's so much there. There's just so much untapped potential. And I really think that if Pierpaolo, does a really good job and the team there does a really good job, they can really balance the books. I also wonder, since Balenciaga still hasn't released their fragrances yet, if Pierpaolo Piccioli will have any input on the fragrance line. I don't think so, because I feel like Kering Beauty is like a separate entity entirely. He might have a say on the packaging because it has to align with his design language. Kind of similar to, the Dries Van Noten fragrances, which I love. I love how aligned it is with the house and the aesthetic of the house. But in terms of formulation, I think they're too far gone. I'm probably sure they've already worked on a lot of formulations already, or they're kind of in the works too far to have any input now. And of course, they're re-releasing some old Balenciaga fragrances, which will be interesting to see what they do with those. Now, beyond design, when I think of Pierpaolo Piccioli, I think of someone that is known for diversity. He was always championed for being very diverse with the way that he casts models in his campaigns, the people that he's around. He's challenges social issues. He has commentary on social issues with a lot of his shows when he was at Valentino. And you contrast that right now with the current narrative around Balenciaga, which is around, of course, the controversy. Will he be able to shake off that dirty stench that is around Balenciaga right now, considering that he is more of like a wholesome, not get into trouble character? Will people notice that there's a new creative director, or will people not care and just be like, yeah, Balenciaga's cancelled forever type of thing? That would be interesting to see if he's able to change opinions. It tends to be the case though, which is why Balenciaga didn't really see that much of a hit when the controversy happened. Like, the people that actually buy the brand don't care, which is very fascinating. So even though people are outraged online, it didn't really lead to like a massive fall in sales for Balenciaga. Now, last but not least, what I'm really looking forward to with Pierpaolo at Balenciaga are the couture collections. I think Demna had amazing couture collections at Balenciaga. I wasn't a fan of everything he did, but I definitely think that a lot of the collections and the narrative around the collections was really great. However, I do think I have fatigue of this Demna post-irony, everything is ironic. What if we made it this way? What if we did this and we changed the context of this? I'm just a bit tired of it, and it's really good now to see someone like Pierpaolo, who's known for making really elaborate gowns and really, really well-crafted dresses, seeing what he does with the Balenciaga archive and the Balenciaga shapes, which we know he has an appreciation of. I'm really curious to see what he does on the couture side. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Pierpaolo Piccioli being the creative director of Balenciaga. Please leave your thoughts down below. And before I go, if you want extra content and you want to be a part of the Fashion Book Club, you can join my Patreon, or you can join the channel as a channel member, and you'll gain access to a lot of extra content. But on that note, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.